Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PR Week. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK, and today we're looking again at client agency pitches, but with a specific focus. Our guests recently completed a pitch process from both sides of the fence. I'm delighted to welcome Amy Dowling, Head of Market Communications at TUI UK&I. Welcome, Amy. Nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
And our other guest is Nicola Dodd, UK Managing Director at Ogilvy PR. Hi, Nicola. Great to have you here.
Hi, John. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you here, and thank you both for taking part. So, bit of context. Following a pitch process, TUI recently appointed Ogilvy PR to support nationwide comms for its First Choice and Marella cruises brands on a retained basis. So congratulations, Nicola, on that win. We're going to talk about the pitch process from both client and agency perspectives today and see what insights our guests can give from both sides. So, firstly, a bit of background. Amy, could you talk about the background to the brief? Why did you do it when you did, and what were you looking for, really?
Yeah, sure. So we had actually appointed within our TUI UK communications team a new PR manager from Marella Cruises. That had happened probably 3 months before we started the process. So we knew that it was a product that had real growth and a need for some specific PR focuses into 2025. So that was sort of the context for our Marella Cruise brand. The First Choice brand had undergone a rebrand, a refresh in September 2023. So it's been a long-standing brand within TUI, but it had a sort of refresh where it was targeting a sort of younger audience, so challenging some of the OTAs and a bit of a sort of different brand to TUI, a bit of a different take around dynamic proposition. And so we really needed to make some noise. It had some challenges around awareness levels, so we wanted to have an agency to come in and create some really creative noise making campaigns for us. So that was the context, and they both sort of lined up, and we felt it was potentially quite a good opportunity to find an agency that could do both jobs for us on quite two different briefs, essentially.
Great. Well, thank you for that background. So, tell us about the process in the early days.
Yeah, so I think we start with sort of absolute clarity on what it is that we want our communications to actually achieve. So, engaging with the key stakeholders within the two brands in our case, and really understanding what is it that we're trying to do, what are the objectives, what are the audiences that we're going after. So, really getting clarity on those goals and objectives and trying to align all your stakeholders, I think, is crucial at the early part of this process, so that you're not sort of going down a road and then needing to change direction. You're minimizing the risk of doing that. So getting really early buy-in helps any sort of late surprises or any stakeholders sort of saying that we're not quite on the right track, etc. And that would include clarity on budget for us really early on. I think it's really important because you can then understand the scale of which your comms needs to be taking. Either is it sort of for us press office BAU activity that we need extra support on, or is it larger scale consumer brand campaigns? So I think just getting clarity top line on what it is that you're trying to achieve early on, and we engage with our procurement and legal teams in those early conversations as well to ensure that they understand what the timeline looks like and when we might need their support.
Sure. And by stakeholders, you talk about internal stakeholders at this point.
At this point, internal stakeholders. So you may have, again, in our case, we have senior brand marketing managers or head of brand, where we want to ensure that they're on board and they're aligned with what we're doing, and that we're not clashing, that we're complementing with any above the line activity, etc. So yeah, in the early stages, it's getting complete alignment as to what everyone thinks we need to know in the comms space.
Sure. And you mentioned procurement, and at what point do you or they start talking about price? Is it too early for that in this process, or is that something that you have a kind of relatively clear idea, at least in terms of boundaries at this sort of early stage?
Yeah, I think we define the budget really early on. I think it's part of the briefing process for us. If we're writing a briefing document, and again, what's the objective? Is it an awareness building campaign? Is it thought leadership? Is it a corporate activity. It really does depend then on the budget, and clearly everyone's different, every organisation's different in terms of the budget that they can allocate. So price is talked about in that respect early on around the budget that you're actually putting aside for your agency. And we'll talk about fee versus activation a lot of the time. But actual price and day rates and so on comes for us a little bit later down the track.
Sure. And tell me about the initial kind of contact you had with agencies about the brief. How did that pan out?
Mhm. So the sort of second part, once we've got clarity on what the comms objectives are and what we think the broad brief will be, we start to have conversations as a comms team around work that we might have seen other agencies do of late. So, the usual PR Week, LinkedIn, looking at what else is going on, and also talking to any peers that work in the industry and their experiences. If you've worked in comms and PR for a long time, you've often crossed paths with various different people that lead agencies or work in agencies. So I think just really informal conversations with your teams. For us, our comms team, we've got some ex-agency people, so they'll have had their experiences as well, and start to have those really informal conversations, like what are we seeing, what are we enjoying, and also then looking at any potential clashes, so conflicts, any other agencies that are working with any of our competitor brands that we know are probably not going to be suitable. And for us, we got it down to a list of, I think, 12, but with a desire to get down to about 8 or 9. We landed on 9 eventually. And it was a simple email outreach to say very broadly, this is what we're looking at. For us, we had a couple of briefs. I don't know, can't remember how much information we gave at that point, but broadly looking into activating into 2025. And we were interested in doing some chemistry sessions, and would they be interested in meeting with us? And pretty much all of them came back. I think there was a couple that had some conflicts that we weren't aware of at the time, or that they perhaps had just appointed. So that was the initial, just an email outreach after lots of conversations about different work that was happening in the comm space.
Great. And can you give me an idea of the sort of variety of agencies you got in touch with? Were they a mixture of sort of big and small? Were they kind of, if you like, vertical as traditional PR, or some that were kind of more integrated? Was it a real sort of mixed bag?
I think it was definitely a mixed bag. Definitely some larger, some slightly smaller, more sort of boutique agencies. I think at the chemistry sessions, that's kind of quite important. From my perspective, to have a bit of a spread, and I think that the whole point of that chemistry session, I think I've talked about it like it's dating. Sometimes you don't know what it is that you don't want until it's there, in no harsh way, and sometimes it's things that just don't click, or you realize that actually what they might have that's really great for another client would just not quite work for you in that particular time, depending on what your team looks like or the setup, etc. So I would say for us it was a real broad mix, and actually in hindsight it's probably quite a good practice to do at chemistry sessions, because it's at that point that you're still figuring out what it is that you want. That's the point of a chemistry session, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming on to you, Nicola, obviously you're one of the agencies that was contacted. What were your sort of initial impressions of the information you were given and of the brief?
Well, obviously, we were really excited. The brands are great brands to work for. So, we were excited to see the opportunity. And then I think, as I've said before, it was the beginning of a really flawless pitch process. And I think we knew from the beginning about how transparent and just about how much information Amy and the team were able to give us right at the outset about what they were looking for, which is really helpful, because then you're entering into the chemistry process with, they might not have a clear understanding of what they're looking for, but I think we began to have an idea about what they were looking for. So it was a really great start.
Great. And presumably you would have seen a lot of these sort of initial outreach type messages about potential work in the past. Could you sort of point us towards any red flags in the early stages that you've had in previous instances, really?
We've been really lucky. Most of our experiences have been really positive when we've been pitching. I guess generally the red flags that agencies would look out for would be lack of clarity on the timing of the process. So is it just a speculative outreach just to get a sense of who's available, who's in the market, what work's going on. I think sometimes that can be a red flag because you feel like it's just a little bit of a benchmarking exercise rather than an actual opportunity. But like I said, I mean, we've been very fortunate. Most of our experiences have been really positive.
Back to you, Amy. What kind of things would you say make agencies fall down at this kind of relatively early contact stage?
Yeah, that's really hard. I think just ahead of the chemistry session, so when we'd had confirmed the 9 agencies that we wanted to meet with, we produced a bit of a pack. I can't remember, maybe sort of 10 slides that described who we were as a team, who they would be meeting on the day. Sounds really basic, but I think it's helpful. You know who you're meeting. You can do a bit of LinkedIn stalking or Instagram stalking. So we described who they were meeting that day, the background, and broadly what those people in that team cover or responsible for. An overview of what the team are currently responsible for at a broad level, because we are, in our case at TUI, we are a communications team of PR and internal communications colleagues. And again, I think that context is really important because sometimes agencies will be pitching to marketing teams. And I think that how you would approach it might be slightly different. You don't want to be teaching PR people how to suck eggs, for example, in a chemistry meeting. It's not going to go down very well. So we gave that context, as well as, yes, please send your creds. Agencies have really beautiful creds or videos, and it's lovely to see. And I think all of the agencies sent theirs in advance, but we only had an hour. You've got 1 hour. It's not very long to get to know anyone, let alone a full agency. And so we asked to see work of a specific type. So in our case for Marella, it was work that was targeting over 55 audience, and then work that was targeting the age-old Gen Z, early millennial audience. And I believe there was one other, and I can't remember what that one was. So they had really specific idea of, okay, what kind of work are they actually wanting to see? Because agencies do so much work with so many different clients, and how are they to know what kind of work that the client is interested in seeing? So I think for us that was quite important, that we got the best value out of the hour. So we did give them that opportunity so that they knew what we were looking for. In terms of falling down, I think there's probably 2 key bits of advice I would probably say in that chemistry meeting, which is, show the diversity of your team in not just bringing the most senior people. Try and bring some diversity across your teams. And then the second one would be, whilst we wouldn't expect people to do really deep research into our brands, I would do a little bit, at least top line, because for us, a question like, what have you seen that we're already doing? How do you think we're already showing up in communications or PR? And the answer might be, really badly, and that's fine, as long as it's an honest take and there's some sort of credibility to the answer. So if you're not able to talk about what the brands are doing and your point of view on the brands in the comm space or social space, for example, it's not, I don't think that goes down all that well.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you agree with that, Nicola? Is that your experience too?
Yeah, definitely. I think a chemistry session is, as Amy said, it is a little bit like dating, but it's also about showing, it's just about showing a little bit more than just who you are as an agency. And you do want to have that initial point of view on a brand, or at least show that you have that interest and passion for the brand that the people that you're coming to meet are guardians of. And I think the brief was brilliant because it was quite prescriptive, and that allowed us to really hone in on the things that we knew the team wanted to see. And it is very different when you're in a chemistry with people who are PR professionals and have got it nailed. And Amy's team is brilliant, and they know a lot, and they have brilliant contacts. So we really needed to focus on the things that we were bringing above and beyond. And so we wanted to show the added value that they would get from working with us. And that was having a point of view on their brand at that point was really important for us. So yeah, it's more than just showing your creds. I think you have to show your passion, show your point of view, and show that you'd be a really great agency partner from the minute you're in that room.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around the added value, and that was something that, again, it's the things that you can't quite put your finger on as a team. When you know your team so well and the people that they're going to be the agency are going to be working with every day. So it comes down to, are you going to get along with these people? Of course, but it is, how is this agency going to level up what we're already doing? And I think that it is that added value, and that, are they going to feel like an extension of our team that's adding that value? And I think that's such an important point.
I think it's also important not to be afraid to ask questions in chemistry as well, because it is as much an opportunity for you to find out from your potential client what they want as them finding out about you. So, as Amy said, we did ask that question a few times. What are you looking for? What can we bring? Why have you asked us here? What do you think we can bring that other agencies maybe can't? And I think, yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions, because that is your opportunity to really show that you have an interest, and also to get those little nuggets that hopefully you can take through into the next round that will help you to do really well in your pitch response.
It's so true about the questions. It's a little bit like, I don't know if you guys have had this when you've like gone for job interviews years ago when you were younger, but you almost always told, like, when they say, have you got any questions, always have some questions. Never don't never say, oh no, I don't have any questions, because it just comes across as disinterest, which is not necessarily the reality, but that's how it can come across. So yeah, definitely come armed with some insightful questions to ask, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, that's really good insights there. It's fantastic. It'd be good to talk about the kind of nuts and bolts of the process of the chemistry meetings, and then also onto the actual pitches themselves. I mean, where were they held? What was the sort of arrangement for those? It'd be good to get a bit of detail in that, Amy.
Yeah, of course. So we had, as I've mentioned, 9 agencies that we wanted to meet for the chemistry sessions, most of which, I think all in this case, were London based. And for us to get around the whole of London in a day would be near on impossible, I would imagine, unless we're going into the evening. So we decided to pick a neutral location. Our head office is based in Luton, so to then ask agencies to come out for an hour chemistry felt unreasonable, might sound too harsh, but it felt a lot for a chemistry session when you're just getting to know each other. So we decided to use one of our media buying agencies head offices. I believe it was fairly central, and blocked out an hour for all of the agencies to come in. There's a lot of diary management and logistics involved in this. It's not an easy one, trying to get everyone's time aligned, and it was a really full on day. But yeah, we decided to do it at a neutral location for the chemistry sessions. And we had told all of the agencies that they would be informed within a week of the chemistry sessions if they were successful in moving forward. So they had the clear timeline on that.
Great. And presumably that was something that was very much appreciated by the agencies. Having that stated timeline must be a very good thing.
Yeah, I think so. And it's something that was sort of cited the whole way through of, we really appreciate the clarity of the timeline, when we should be expecting to hear. And I think at the end of the process, the pitch process, it wasn't really eked out, but it was definitely a few days longer for us to be able to tell the agencies whether they were going to be appointed or not. And we shared an update. Hey, look, we're a bit delayed. I appreciate your waiting, but we will come back to you. And evidently, that's not always the case. That you don't hear anything, and it must be awful. You know what it's like when you're waiting to hear about something that you've put so much time and effort into. So yeah, it was important for us to give the clarity of the timeline and when they would hear back about each stage.
I think the clarity of timing was something that was so well thought through in the whole pitch process, because as you say, Amy, it's really important to be able to understand how that timing is going to run, and even from the outset having clear timelines around the first process, the second process, when you were going to feedback, when the next meetings were going to be. And also nothing changed through the process. There wasn't like changes of dates or changes of time or changes of people. It was all very clear, and we were given lots of time to do each stage, which means that ultimately you end up with a much better result at the end of it. And so we were really grateful for that, because I think it allowed us to be the best that we could through the process.
So tell us about the next process. So presumably after this, it was on to the actual pitches.
Yeah, so after the chemistries, we whittled it down to 4 agencies to go through to the next stage. And I believe within a couple of weeks, they received written briefs. So a written brief for Marella Cruises and a written brief for First Choice. They were very different briefs. Marella was a more traditional, we wanted a creative response, a sort of campaign creative, whereas First Choice was, we wanted some support of a sort of how we should be approaching PR for a more modern travel brand, and so a much more strategic response. So they had those delivered via email, or maybe the portal, I think by this point had been put live by our procurement colleagues. So they had the written briefs, which included budgets. And then we set up a briefing workshop, I think we'd called it, within a couple of weeks, where they could come to our head office in Luton and meet with the marketing guys from each of the brands and the PR teams that were responsible, the PR managers that were responsible for the brands, and have a session. I think it was a good hour, have a session, sort of unpick that brief and ask lots of questions, which I think Nicola's made a point previously when we've spoken about this, which is that's what happens in real life. And I'd never really thought about it like this. When we've approached this pitch process, we've not gone, oh, we want gold stars of the best pitch process. This is just genuinely how we wanted to run it, and sort of, I'd said before, sort of thanking your future self for a decent process, because then you're not unpicking any mistakes or any routes that you've gone down that aren't quite right. And I think this is what would happen in real life, or should happen in real life. You get a brief, and an agency should be able to come back and ask lots of questions and get clarity and ensure that their creative response or strategic response is in the right direction, and you're not wasting time going down a route that's not what the client wants. So I guess it kind of replicated a real life scenario, and these were real life briefs. I know in some situations that the briefs can be sort of finger in the sky, and perhaps they haven't clarified that yet, but these were real life briefs, so we were doing the work that we would want to do in the future anyway. And I think that was also really appreciated, and the feedback we got was like, this doesn't always happen, you don't often get the chance to do this. And it was also really important, and again, procurement were very clear on this, it has to be a fair process. So what you do for one agency, you have to do for all. And so they were all given the opportunity to come and meet us. They all had the same amount of time, that it was up to them what they asked us. And then between that point and the point of pitch, which I think was 4 weeks, they had to actually respond to the brief officially in the pitch process. We wouldn't have been able to provide any extra information to one without providing it to the other. So that was the next stage was the briefing workshop, which I think was very well received. I'm sure Nicola will say if not, but I think it was.
Yeah, no, great to get your view on that, Nicola.
No, it was really good. And I think quite often a pitch process will have a Q&A in it, but not often actually going and meeting the teams and seeing the people who lead the brand and really being able to get under the skin of what they are looking for. And that's exactly what Amy and the team provided, was a chance to really meet the brand guardians, really understand what they wanted, ask some tough questions as well, so that we were making sure that our response, as you say, it was a real life response, that our response was really going to land in the right way, tick the right boxes. As you said, Amy, one of them was a strategic response, and that in a sense that's almost more difficult, because you're trying to get halfway through a strategic direction and hope that it's right. And having the chance to ask all those questions was just brilliant. And, the team that we met at that point were the team that we were pitching to. So it was exactly the same. There were no surprises between the two parts of the process. And that also was super important. And really, really, we were really grateful for that.
Amy, tell us more about how, obviously I know you're not going to want to go into details of the individual pitches, but what would you say kind of won it for Ogilvy?
You've got the pitch, the big pitch, which it all sort of hangs on, I guess, but it does really start from your first interactions. It all does count. I think that's really important to flag. And so one example that we really appreciated from Nicola was she asked to have a call with me. I think it was in between the chemistry and the workshop, perhaps, which was a change in a particular team member. So again, I hadn't realised this at this point, but the group of people that Nicola brought to the room on the chemistry was intentionally a sort of view on who the team could actually be. And so then when there was a change a couple of weeks later, Nicola called me and said, look, there's going to be a change of team. And that seems something, one team member, I think it was, that seems really small, but it speaks volumes about about Nicola and about her team and how the agency is run, and that whole sort of transparency, and being really upfront was values that we felt really strongly about is important for us as an in-house team, and having that relationship. And so it was all of those interactions really do add up to the final bonanza of the amazing work that the team had pulled together. So I think that's really important. And so the way Ogilvy showed up throughout the process was impressive. The way they approached the workshop session, the type of questions that they asked, the insight that they were bringing. So it does all come together. In the pitch in particular, I think what really stood out, it sounds really simple, but they just really got the brief. They just really understood the brief. The strategy and the creative was really well connected. The strategy and the creative, it needs to connect, but it really did make sense. You were taken on a journey with them around, like, this is the strategic positioning, this is the insight, and then the creative made sense to that. So it all just added up, to be honest. And the faces in the room were the faces that we'd seen before. There were no, likewise, from our perspective as a client, we didn't dangle new people into the room, and Ogilvy didn't do that either, and that made a big difference. And I think for the first choice brief, it was a really hard brief, and what we liked is there was some outside of the box thinking. They weren't We didn't ask for creative necessarily, so they focused more on how we could show up, and territories that we could play in as a brand. So that was quite new and interesting, and I know that the team since appointment have done further work. We fully expected the first choice one to be the trickier one, and to need to go into more detail and work through what it's going to look like, but it felt like they could be a real extension of our team. But every single agency that was involved in the pitch process really did an incredible job, and the work and the effort and the creativity that goes into it across the board was really incredible. And it wasn't the easiest decision, but yeah, Ogilvy for us really did stand out.
Great. And it would be a good idea actually to sort of get a little bit more understanding about what the agencies were specifically asked for in the brief. I mean, obviously you don't have to give too many of the nuts and bolts of it, but how much of it was the sort of strategic vision and plan? How much was some creative ideas? How much of it was talking about different platforms? I don't know, different media types. Give us a bit of a flavour maybe of the kind of things you were asking for and you were looking for.
Yeah, of course. So again, two very different briefs. So Marella was a much more traditional play. For those that don't know, cruise is huge as an industry and really important strategically for TUI. So Marella Cruises is a British brand, but comparatively it isn't perhaps as well known as some of the other big players. But what we are finding in the industry is that the age is coming down. There's more people interested in cruising than ever before, especially post COVID. And so it's a really interesting time to start to talk to potential new audiences. And as part of, we have the strength of TUI, Marella Cruises being part of TUI, and I think that's something that we wanted to play on a little bit further. And so the brief was, how do we reach that audience that's, we called them cruise curious, that are not put off by. We weren't trying to convince people that were put off by cruising. This was very much people that were potentially interested but hadn't before. The biggest challenge for the brief was to not do a category job, which is very easy territory to go down when it comes to cruising. And I think what we saw from Ogilvy in that pitch process was really trying to differentiate us in quite a saturated market, crowded, loud market, to make us stand out. So that was pretty much the task. I don't know, Nicola, if you've got anything to add on that, but that was the task for Marella.
That's about it. And as you said, I think the biggest challenge was making sure that we were finding things that were unique to Marella and not leaning into that category job, which is quite easy to do once you start to sort of ideate around things. So that was a really important thing for us to have guardrails against, making it really ownable.
And then first choice, as I've said, was very different, was more, we actually didn't really want or ask for creative. It was more, how does a travel brand it's difficult to explain, but it's very easy for travel brands to just play in travel spaces. Again, that sort of category job, and we really need and want First Choice to stand out as a modern travel brand for younger audiences that aren't as brand loyal. It's a much more playful brand than TUI, and it was more around how can we almost turn it on its head, and that comes into using more influencers, for example, more social, etc. But it really was almost behaving like a not like a travel brand, and how do we actually do that but still get the messaging out there around how First Choice is different, and what interesting things we've got in the First Choice around First Choice Flex and weather guarantee, and there's some really lovely rich stuff, and how do we tell that story in a different way that's different to TUI and clearly different to Marella. So that it was a harder brief, and we needed some real outside of the box thinking with the First Choice brief. And again, Ogilvy definitely brought that to the table. But yeah, First Choice has been an interesting one because it wasn't just a straight creative idea that we were after.
What was your experience of the First Choice one specifically, Nicola, would you say?
I think everyone was really excited by it. So, although it was, as you say, a difficult brief, it really challenged us and it gave us an opportunity to think really differently and bring together our influencer expertise, think social first, think really about how a brand like First Choice would get into those more Gen Z titles, and thinking differently about media as well, coming back with a completely different approach to media strategy and looking at where maybe First Choice doesn't need to be, or conversely, where First Choice can be through the already amazing existing contacts that Amy and her team have. So again, it was very much about what's that added value that we can bring, that different perspective, and being a bit brave about how we approached it, which is why that tissue session, the workshop session, was so important, because with a brief like that, it would have been very easy to get it wrong. And so we wanted to test a few different thoughts at that session to make sure that we were coming back with something that felt right for the team, because it was difficult, but it was super exciting as well. And we're really loving already working with the team, and we're excited about what we're going to show in the next stage of the work with them. It's
Great.
been really fun.
Look forward to it. Interested to know as well, actually, from both of you, who did you have in the room in the pitch? I mean, you don't need to name names, but in terms of the types of roles of the people who were present, both agency and the client side, I guess.
We had our PR and communications manager from Marella Cruises who joined the business in April, I think. So he was relatively fresh, but comes from an agency background. So it was interesting for him to be on the other side, the dark side, or is it the light side? I don't know. I don't know. It depends on which way you look at it, I guess. So we had him in the room. We also had our head of customer experience from Marella Cruises as well, and our senior brand marketing manager. So that was for cruise, and then myself and another senior PR manager at the time. Then for First Choice, it was the head of brand marketing and our PR and communications manager for First Choice. So both pitches had someone from marketing or a sort of brand background, and the PR team as well.
Great. And Nicola from Ogilvy's contingent?
So I was there, and then our strategy and creative lead, Charlie Coney. And then we had one of our brilliant junior creatives. We had our strategist, and we had a couple of people from the account lead, and then one of our media relations engagement specialists as well, because we wanted to show, we didn't want to just rock up as a senior team. That didn't feel right. It needed to be the people who are going to do the work, and obviously the people for First Choice who actually represent the audience is always helpful too. So yeah, that was our mix of people.
Great. Sounds good. So obviously the pitches happened, and then you would have had to give the sad news to the three agencies that didn't win it. Obviously, always going to be a difficult thing to do. How did you approach that, Amy?
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult thing to do because you so appreciate the amount of effort. Like, it really is incredible how much effort agencies go to, and the lengths that they go to. So yeah, it's never easy, and there's lots that happen internally once the pitches are finished around scoring, and then the procurement piece as well, and all of the documentation that's been submitted. So there's lots of internal conversations. And once the decision is made, we decided to tell them face to face or virtually face to face. So we set up a call, and I just feel like that's more appropriate given the amount of time. By this point, it's a sort of 2.5 month process that they've been engaged with, the hours that's been put in. So it didn't feel to me an email would suffice. Chemistry sessions, I think an email's fine because it's ultimately a kind of an hour of their time. But yeah, we shared the news face to face and offered the opportunity to give direct feedback. And that's the stuff that we loved and the stuff that just didn't quite hit the mark. And hopefully it's useful. But yeah, it's not the nicest call to make, clearly, but I think an important one.
Yeah, and presumably they really appreciated the fact that you were giving feedback and obviously saw them face to face. That sounds like a really kind of personable, human way of doing it, I guess.
I think so. If I remember, the 3 agencies that weren't appointed all had said that they'd appreciated the call and the opportunity to provide feedback, and that I think one of them had said often they find themselves like chasing for feedback to understand why perhaps they hadn't been appointed. So yeah, as far as I know, I believe it was appreciated that we took the time to speak to them on a call.
What do you see as your kind of do's and don'ts for the pitch process from the point of view of both client and agency? Who'd like to go first with some of your thoughts?
I can start if you like. I think do give agencies a really clear timeline and also enough time to really give the response and your brief the justice that it deserves, and for them to show up at their best as well. So that would be my first do.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that from a client side. I do understand the pressures of working in-house and various stakeholders that you need to align with and moving goalposts, etc. For me, get clarity on the budget early on and just get clarity on what it is that you're looking for and what your objectives are. That should then inform what your timeline is as well, clearly. But yeah, trying and if you don't have people aligned internally on what it is that you need and want and what budget there is, don't start the process. Kind of stand strong and talk to your internal stakeholders and say, until we get clarity on this, it's not helpful for anyone to start a process with agencies. It's wasteful of everyone's time. So try and stay strong would be my advice before engaging with agencies until you've got some clarity. And even if that causes some slight uncomfortable conversations internally, that would be my advice.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks so much to Amy and Nicola for joining us for such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. I hope everyone listening to this has too. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PR Week's Beyond the Noise podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.